A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to films I should have talked about years ago. So now, wouldn't you know, we are at the 10-year anniversary, pretty much, of a certain Illumination series that started out in 2016. What I'm more specific about here is that after the string of successes with films like the Despicable Me series, The Lorax, and a few others, it made sense by the minds of Illumination that The Secret Life of Pets would be their next best thing to work with here. And I will say, to some extent, they actually did a good job at giving us something new for a change, instead of all this Despicable Me stuff, because there's only so much of it that we can work with. I mean, only 4 movies, but you gotta imagine everything else that's been put together since then. The toys, the games, the spin-offs, including the Minions duology. Again, there's a lot that adds up over time. But what do I have to say about The Secret Life of Pets, as well as its sequel, which came out 3 years later? Well, first off, it's a unique series for what it is, but it's not ultimately very original. Some people actually do give it a bit of a comparison to the Toy Story films. Yeah, you heard that right. Illumination practically rips off Pixar 21 years later. Let me explain. Louis C.K. voices a dog known as Max, whom lives in a New York apartment and practically has everything to himself. He's got all the food, the comforts, and the entertainment that he could possibly look for. And there's various neighbors all around him with all sorts of crazy things going on. You have Gidget, a adorable white puppy who basically gets a lot of pampering done to her. You have Chloe, a massive cat played by Lake Bell. And you have, of course, various other characters along the way. Mel, Putty, and even Norman. But then, of course, there comes along a new character to the mix, where you have yourself a small, somewhat average dog. I don't know exactly what breed Max is supposed to be, but there is, of course, a giant brown woolly piece of fluff known as Duke, played by Eric Stonestreet. And the thing is that despite being a newcomer, he of course is a pretty rambunctious and difficult dog to handle. I mean, a big dog in a small apartment is not exactly a great fix. And here we have ourselves an exact instance of what the consequences could be like. Apart from Max having his disagreements with Duke, even going so far as to threaten him at one point, Duke, of course, is a bit more on the benevolent and strong-hearted, yet kind of naive and oblivious to more than half the things. So you can't really say that it's very much like Toy Story personality-wise, because it's true that Woody was written very much like an incoherent jerk to Buzz Lightyear. But here we have Max basically doing similar things to what Sheriff Woody did with Buzz Lightyear. I mean, he of course tried to implement similar things to Buzz, including accusations on him taking his time away from Andy, and even going so far as to set a trap that unwittingly sets Buzz out the window of Andy's room. Here we have essentially what goes like a similar thing that takes place, because a sausage factory gets talked about, and Duke happens to be a big fan of sausages, so that's where the two end up going to. They are, of course, taken upon themselves, as eventually what goes on is that there's a problem, a snag that ends up getting them taken over to a pound. At least that's what potentially will happen. The thing is, after a bit of a walk in the alley, considering what has been going on, especially with the sausage factory thing that's been happening, you could say that they've ended up in quite the pickle. There, of course, is eventually a scene that takes place in the sewer, and a massive snake pops out. Snowball, the name of a white bunny played by Kevin Hart, is, let me tell you, something just as impressive for what you might call an antagonist. You might think that a white rabbit would do little to none against 2 larger dogs that could easily take him on, but let me remind you that the thing about cat and mouse has been pretty much reversed for a while now. Mouse goes up against cat, and the cat, more than half the time, ends up losing the fight. And so, What I'd have to say about The Secret Life of Pets is that this whole adventure really does toil around with a number of different things. Even an encounter with a pretty old basset hound, in which that some assistance is eventually brought together in an effort to hopefully stop this Snowball character from hopefully becoming a big nuisance for the city. You see, there was actually a bit of an origin story, if you will, a backstory, I should probably be more appropriate, in which that Snowball talks about how he had once had a pretty good life in and of himself. He used to be a lucky bunny, being a favored gift of a young child, but had unfortunately since been left abandoned. It's that classic story, a cliche in which that builds up the personality to which that is, of course, our main antagonist. And Snowball really does an impressive fine job leading the charge with all sorts of crazy animals involved. You have sun dogs and cats, especially ones from the alleyways. There's birds, mouses, and rats, and a number of other things that also come around every which way trying to take down the city of New York. So you could say that Max and Duke are pretty much the only ones that have known him well enough in an effort to put an end to his evil plans. And that's essentially what the rest of the movie does. That encounter with the old basset hound, which, I kid you not, I originally thought he was played by James Best, the same guy who's been voicing Roscoe Coltrane from Dukes of Hazzard. He, of course, had died in 2015, aged 89, but like I said, because this movie was a year after his death, one would have thought maybe that could have been his voice, or maybe not. The credits, of course, suggest otherwise. Still, the whole rest of the film with this epic scene that goes on around where Snowball's hijacking a van and nearly gets himself killed, but with the help of Max and Duke, they are eventually able to rescue him and help him straighten himself up. While I will say that this is a not so lengthy review of it, I only saw it once in theaters, and having rewatched it again a little while ago, I was able to simply recall a good majority of what the original plot was like. And I will say that some details are more than worth mentioning, such as a poodle known as Leonard playing some heavy metal in the background, which is a bit funny. And there was, of course, many other characters along the way. A dachshund getting some massages from a beating mixer, which normally would be kind of dangerous, but I guess because it was running slow, it acted sort of like a vibrator to him. But with many others that I could say, many other pieces that were originally from the trailers, and then of course, we can't forget about the pug. Yeah, a pug in a Secret Life of Pets film. Even though Secret Life of Pets wasn't all that fantastic by writing standards, as well as a number of other things that I previously mentioned, it actually did good enough in theaters and elsewhere, to the point where that it would actually get a sequel 3 years later. I, of course, will be talking about that in tomorrow's piece of films I should have talked about years ago, so stick around for that.